Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwin, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're talking about an epic battle between the Tempestus Scions and the Tyrannid Genestealers. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions for topics, please comment down below. And if you enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Tempestus Scions versus the Genestealers. The Tempestus Scions are the most elite military force the Astra Militarum has at their disposal, armed with some of the most powerful weapons the Imperium has to offer, and trained since birth in the art of war. These stormtroopers are well equipped to accomplish special operations that no other Imperial Guard regiment can achieve. Armed with their trademark hotshot lasguns and hell pistols, these soldiers take combat to the heart of the enemy with blinding speed and deadly precision. Their accuracy is aided by their highly protective carapace armor's integrated and distinctive Omni-Shield helmet targeting systems. Each soldier is a perfect specimen of health and moral purity, forged by experience and training to become proficient killers that are capable of infiltrating behind enemy lines and exterminating almost any foe. On the other side, you have the Genestealer, a highly intelligent and powerful Tyrannid bioform that forms the vanguard of the Great Devourer's ranks. Genetically designed by the hive mind to possess the necessary tools to survive behind enemy lines, these deadly creatures can work semi-independent from the hive fleet to rip apart the enemies through infiltration, sabotage, and deep strike assaults. Armed with deadly claws, capable of tearing through tank armor, and proficient enough to move at superhuman speed, this bioform can slaughter dozens of humans in a matter of minutes. On countless battlefields, the Genestealer and the Tempestus Scion have collided in brutal conflict, although the Genestealer rarely possesses any ranged capabilities, and the Tempestus Scions understand that they operate at peak efficiency when allowed to use their tremendous firepower. The two factions make worthy foes for one another. It's impossible to predict which faction will come out on top on any given variable setting, but when these two elite units collide, the bloodshed is devastating. Such was the case when the Captic Eagles collided with the Genestealer brood on Vitria. Vitra was a world at the heart of the Red Scar region, though the men and women of the Vitra system were no strangers to strife. A new enemy had recently shown itself. The teleprayer signals bore news of many armed killers and shadow-dwelling Xenos abroad in the planet's capital city. It was only a matter of hours before the lords of the ever-vigilant Ordo Tempestus dispatched its agents to the Vitra system on a mission of eradication. The task had found its way to the merciless Tempestor Prime, Ulthor Abraxas of the 11th Captic Eagles, a man for whom the concept of wasted time was blasphemy. Within moments, the officer had summoned his men to battle readiness and ordered his pilots to assign the void ship, Punitive Measure, a new heading. Abraxas strode impatiently down the punitive steel-clad corridors as his servo skull, formed from the remains of his predecessor, for whom he personally executed for hesitation, chattered out the Ordo Tempestus data brief. The skull's robotic tone told of a wave of civil unrest that had destabilized the Vitrian authorities, and a strange static that confounded all attempts to reach the planet by psychic communion. Despite the nearest Hive Fleet tendril being in the Octarian sector, everything Abraxas had heard of the Vitrian anomaly corresponded with the intelligence he had gathered regarding early-stage Tyrannid invasions. En route to the dropship's launch hangar, Abraxas barged into the Segmentum Navigatorium in the belly of the ship. He slammed his last pistol onto the curved mahogany desk belonging to the Sanctum Sol Navigator. He demanded an explanation as to why the psychic interference around Vitra was slowing his progress. The Navigator was a gangling scarecrow of a man called Audacious Gongst. Gongst complained bitterly of a stabbing pain that lanced his third eye whenever he turned warped gaze towards the Vitra system. To progress any faster toward it was out of the question, for they would not risk his Emperor's given gift. Such an order would only antagonize the great and powerful House Gongst, and no doubt provoke a swift and humiliating demotion for Abraxas. The Tempestor Prime launched himself across the Navigator's desk and grabbed Gongst's head with both hands, pounding it sideways against a hardwood frame until the Mystic's ears were little more than a bloody mush. Through gritted teeth, Abraxas told the Navigator he would steer the Punitive into the heart of the anomaly or meet a swift and humiliating death at this very moment. Before the hour was out, the Punitive was speeding through the warp towards their quarry, making translations back into real space just outside the Vitra system. The ship's headlong charge had caused Gongst to suffer a crippling aneurysm, but Abraxas only grunted in irritation, telling the Navigator's aide to take it up with the Official Perfectus if they so wished. As the punitive entered Vitria's orbit, Abraxas muted out the bridge's protest and ordered his captive eagles to assemble for pre-strike edification. After delivering a typical stern briefing in the Valkyrie base, Abraxas strapped himself into the command chair of his assault craft, the Winged Persecution. His Voxmaster, Scion Terastus, shifted through the scattered Mayday reports of Vitria's capital. Sure enough, there were several garbled accounts of Xeno sightings in Viopolis. The Persecution led the rest of its squadron down through the wet gray thunderheads above the slumbering city, each Valkyrie's Tempestus Idents ensuring their descent went unchallenged. Terastus used the Persecution's modified auspex to scan the abandoned buildings in the derelict Marvit docks. Terastus' instinct was once again proven correct. There were dozens of heat ghosts within the Moonsilver dockyards, and each pale green blip was moving within human speed. They were fainter than the readouts of a hot-blooded human citizen, and their loose outlines suggested far too many limbs. Abraxas' top lip curved in disgust as the Valkyrie swept over the docks and out over the ocean of glass around Viopolis. The commissariat's suspicions had been proven correct. The Tempestor Prime barked out an intercept course for each of the Valkyries in his squadron, and the aircraft banked sharply, peeling off as they roared back over the moonlit seascape towards Viopolis' docks. The Tempestor Prime was a great believer in the power of surprise attacks, and the timing was critical. Turning back in his command chair, he made a quick visual inspection of his men. He nodded curtly in approval as he found them primed and ready as ever, not a single finger or bootlace out of place. The Valkyrie assault carriers zoomed high above the shard spires and battlements of the dock. They did not slow as their side doors clanged open and the Tempestus Scions bailed out 2 by 2, Abraxas to the fore. The stormtroopers spun head over heels through the air for a quick moment before punching their grav chutes and adopting vertical strike posture, each descending with legs braced and supercharged las guns pointed downward. Such was the precision of their dispersal that they formed a perfect geometric grid in the sky, and many of the citizens looked up in wonder at the sight. The blistering salvo of fire that erupted from the descending Scion squads started well before the first boots touched the ground. Pinpoint volley blasted into the dark buildings of the docks, smashing roofs into jagged triangular wedges of glasscrete. Xeno figures were revealed under each broken dome, the creatures scattering as quick as insects under the Persecution searchlight. Yet the Tyranids were still too slow to escape the sudden fury of the Tempestus Scions' attack. Several were impaled or crushed by the falling debris that had been the dockyard's roofs. Many more were pierced through by the stabbing lasers of the descending Scions. By the time Abraxas and his squad crushed down onto the scattered gravel, over a dozen gangling Xeno corpses lay smoldering in pools of their own foul ichor. The creatures were Genestealers, without a doubt, a vicious, clawed horror listed in the Ordo records as a hybrid of both a Tyranid and a human. Their existence was a stomach-churning offense towards the purity of mankind, but as a foe they were not to be underestimated. The remainder of the hideous brood had already fled back into the shadows, though Terastus' Auspex array chimed with daunting frequencies as it picked out the location of nearby creatures. Crouched beneath a statue, with 2 extra arms spray-painted on its chest, Abraxas consulted the data Terastus spooled to his slate monotron. 2 of the Xeno heat ghosts were far larger than the others, one close at hand and the other far fainter, smudged deep inside the ruins they had just passed over during planetfall. Eyes narrowed, the Tempestor Prime ordered an intercept course towards the closest of the 2 signals. The Militarum Tempestus made their way through the dark and dusty tunnels, section by section, guns at their shoulder. When Abraxas led his men into the vaulted gloom of a ruined atrium, Genestealers skittered out from the shadows as if reacting to some unheard signal. The Tempestus Scions, which were well used to covering the exits of any space they entered, put their cautionary firing solutions into practice. Volleys of red light shot out, the air itself sizzled, bulbous heads were burst open, rigid torsos speared through, and clawed arms were severed clean from their shoulders. But for every Tyranid that fell ruined to the ground, another charged on. Suddenly, a Genestealer 3 times the size of its brethren hurled screaming out from a second-floor archway at the end of the atrium. Abraxas and his men didn't so much as twitch, for they had more immediate threats to neutralize. Tight fire patterns interlocked, a lactis of ruby-red death that scythed down the closest Genestealers, even as their leader beast sprang from the fray. Then the next wave was amongst them. Scion Lagnus died in a welter of blood as a Genestealer grabbed his limbs with all 4 of its arms and pulled his body apart. Scion Dacius' requests for backup were cut short when a Tyranid claw yanked his throat out and much of his spine with it. Scion Erraticus found his ceramite breastplates wrenched aside, and a claw, like a cluster of daggers, thrusted into his heart. The Scions fought back with stoic efficiency. The Xenos were fast. The muscle memory of the Scions' brutal training was the only thing keeping them in the fight. They closed their formation tighter and tighter. Point-blank volleys of fire, stabbing combat knife, and swinging fists combined to keep the aliens at bay. Here a stoic Scion dropped to allow a comrade to blast a Tyranid closing in upon him. There a Tempestor swung his power sword to sever a claw aimed at one of his men. Taratus voxed an alarm signal a split second before the hulking brood leader barreled into the Scions. Its limbs snatched away weapons and took heads from necks with uncanny dexterity. Some unnerving quality about the thing made even Abraxas catch his breath. His skin crawled under his uniform as if it was alive. Mortis runes flashed red in the officer's helmet relay, each marking a new death amongst his men. The red-hot anger burnt away the choking cloud of fear, and the Tempestor Prime drew an ornate power mace from beneath his cloak. Abraxas leapt over Lagnus's limbless corpse and swung his weapons-energized head at the giant beast's oversized cranium. Even though the Broodlord was tearing Scion Grestus apart, its reactions were still horribly fast. The beast shot out a claw and caught Abraxas around the shoulder. Its talons all but sheared off the Tempestor's arm as he dangled in its grip. In the process, the Broodlord left his head exposed for a moment. It was all the chance Abraxas needed. He brought his other arm out from under his bunched cloak, slamming a long-bladed dirk he had concealed there right between the monster's eye. It was a trick with which he had killed traitorous kings and warrior lords alike. The Broodlord slumped to the floor in a clatter of chitinous plates, and Abraxas added the Tyranid leader beast to the tally. A chorus of screams echoed from the Xeno creatures infecting the dock buildings, disturbingly human in their anguish. The Scions took heart of their foes' dismay, kicking and shouldering the reeling Genestealers until there was a few precious yards in which to bring their guns to bear. Hotshot lasgun fire flashed out all at once, filling the air with the stench of burning Xeno meat. Without so much as a backward glance, the Scions fell back into a contact phalanx. Grav-chute backpacks clicked together against ceramite plates as they formed defensive hexagons. It was a formation they had practiced together every day since their childhood in the Scoloprogenium, and it hadn't failed them yet. In twos and threes the Genestealers started forward, but where one Scion failed to put down his foe, a comrade would stab out a killing volley of fire. Genestealers fell from above, attacking from a new direction, but Taratus' vox calls alerted his squadmates in time to blast them back into the shadows. In tight lockstep, the troopers moved to the edge of the atrium, killing more and more Xenos with each passing second. As one, they turned to the chamber's center, shoulder to shoulder with the wall at their backs. More Genestealers rushed from the shadows, but against the firing line the Scions had formed, they stood no chance. The attacks became less frequent, and then ceased altogether. The only sound in the atrium was the cooling of lasgun barrels. Surrounded by a semicircle of dead Xenos, the Scions still stood at full alert. Not a single muscle twitched, not a single word was uttered. Seconds stretched out into minutes. Still, no needle-toothed faces emerged from the darkness. No screaming alien beasts dropped from the open archways. All was still. The only movements across the field of corpses were from the motes of glasscrete that danced in the shafts of the moonlight high above. At a brief hand signal from their officer, the Scions began systematically checking the fallen Xenos. Pinpoint execution shots burst the heads of the Genestealers that so much as twitched as a sign of life. Abraxas ordered Voxmaster Taratus to expand the range of his auspex to maximum. His report was important, yet not a single Genestealer heat ghost prowled the docks. In fact, there were no signs for a mile in all directions. Abraxas studied his slate monotron's relay spool with hawk-like vigilance, for his instinct told him that the fight wasn't over. A brief smudge flicked at the edge of the officer's helmet relay, and even then it was only for an instant. It was an identity blink that most Imperial officers would only dismiss as a glitch or even a brief exhalation from the device's machine spirit. But Abraxas was no normal officer. Summoning his men with a click of his gauntlet finger, the Tempestor Prime led the advance. Abraxas checked the corners as he glided through the dusty corridors of the dock vault. The grip of his hotshot las pistol was reassuring in his hand, even if his wounded shoulder burned under the anesthetic strip he had just hastily applied. Since his promotion to Tempestor Prime, he had meant to check his routes for him, but old habits die hard. The training of the Militarum Tempestus was so ingrained that he would no more shake this old protocol off than he could override the need to breathe. The Tempestor Prime allowed himself a tiny curt nod. The men advancing in a phalanx behind him were all but silent. Considering they were clad from head to toe in ceramite and armoplast, they should have made as much noise as an Arbitus riot killer squad. Instead, they moved with such a fluid grace that their advance was accompanied by no more than whispers of cloth. After checking his slate monotron to confirm that his men were operating in peak efficiency, Abraxas scanned the darkness ahead. He held up a hand to halt the progress while he assessed the route forward. The dripping of water and the occasional soft clicks from the Auspex relay were the only sounds that broke the silence. Abraxas could smell the oily stink of the nearby docks through the nasal plugs of his Omnishield helm. There was a trace of human blood laced beneath it, and something else, an acrid scent that lingered unpleasantly in his sinuses. There was a slight tap on Abraxas' wrist. He turned and halted, making the gesture to report. In response, 2 of the Scions stepped to his flank, their hotshot lasguns trained down the shadowy corridor ahead.
Sir, advise pan monotron north-northwest, maximum yield.
Signed Vox Officer Teratus.
Continue report with haste.
Signed Abraxas, irritation clearly in his gesture.
Locate human vital signs near anomaly, decreasing, transmitting data.
Abraxas tensed as the location that Terastus had indicated flashed up on his slate monotron. It was less than 10 meters away. As the Vox officer had claimed, there was indeed a fading pulse of a human life form, a blue dot winking unsteadily at the heart of a cylindrical space nearby. What Abraxas had taken at first glance as a white chimney or a maintenance duct was on closer inspection a chamber with its roof open to the stars. It was occupied by a dying human, and if the vague smudge around it was anything to go by, his killer as well. The Tempestus Prime extended a hand with 3 fingers pointed towards the largest men in the squad. The trio of killers muscled to the front, dutifully flanking him as he padded down the corridors. Within moments, a circular chamber was on the other side of the graffiti-covered walls. Abraxas pulled something from under his cloak, carefully removing a long scar from the dusty alcove in the brickwork and replacing it with a live crack grenade. He stepped back and turned away, motioning for his men to do the same. The fingers of his gauntlet counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2. On the count of 1, the crack grenade detonated with an ear-splitting bang. A moment later, Abraxas and his Scions barreled into the wall with the force of a charging Ogren. An entire section of the wall shattered outward. Abraxas and his men rolled with the charge and came up in a gun-crouch readiness. The Tempestus Prime took in his surroundings in a single second, but the sight would stay with him forever. There in the moonlight shimmered a tyrannid life form, impossibly long of limb and spine from elegant head to talon-fringed hooves. The monster was withdrawing its mouth tendrils from the nostrils of a figure robed in the manner of an astropath. Abrax felt his bile rise as he realized that the creature was a lictor, a tyrannid mind-stealer organism. Each of its tapered maw feelers were slick with brain matter, glittering grayish-pink in the moonlight. The creature's victim was moaning and withering weakly as the Xeno beast cradled it like a mother holding a sickly infant. As one of the stormtroopers opened fire, the beast moved. Some chameleonic properties of its skin made it hard to score a telling hit. In a moment, it was amongst them, its mantis-like claws darting and stabbing. Secondary limbs clawed through the necks and swatted over the closest of the Scions taking aim. Abrax stepped back into the corridor, all efforts at stealth abandoned. He bellowed a command for reinforcements into the Vox. His men stood shoulder to shoulder to protect him, forming a wall of armor and flesh where Glasscrete had stood moments ago. He could hear those at the front being smashed into the splintered shards by the flailing limbs of the gruesome beast. The rest were holding their nerves, sending volley after volley into the creature's midsection. Abraxas caught a flash of movement as the lictor leapt vertically up into the cylindrical chamber. It clambered high and was gone. A chamber boomed loud, and the moon was blotted out. A backwash of engines blasted down the cylinder. Abraxas heard the familiar cough of volleyed heavy bolter fire. A second later, the long-limbed Xeno beast came tumbling down towards them, its gangling limbs striking splinters from the sheer walls. Its split corpse hit the chamber tile floors with a satisfying crunch. The Tempestus Prime drew his skull-tipped power mace as his Valkyrie reinforcement passed overhead. With a single bludgeoning blow, he turned the beast's tentacled head to mush, just to be sure.
Good enough, Eagles,
said Abrax, his tone flat.
Initiate cleanup.
Half of the Tempestus Prime's men began piecing together the dead, the other half standing at full alert, checking readouts and listening to the sounds of scrambling claws in the distance. Medic Aerobidian tended to the wounded, while Abrax took a moment to examine the chamber. There were words smeared in blood upon its walls. He looked closer. indistinct phrases, each telling of numberless killers from the void, of death made flesh, and of a great devourer that would not be denied its feast. A single word stood out from the ravings, over and over again: Cryptis. It was the name of the binary star system that Abrax could see glittering in the sky high above, a system so rich in human life that it would prove irresistible for the Tyranid race. Billions of unwitting souls cut off from the Imperium by the alien static of the hive mind and ripe for the slaughter. A cold sensation crept over Abrax's shoulder like a cloak of ice draped behind him. He raised his slate monotron and punched in the rune sequence for the commissariat. He had to warn them. And those were 40 facts on the Tempestus Scions and the Genestealers. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can make these types of videos. If you guys have any two factions that you guys would like to see collide with one another in a cool story, please let me know in the comment section below and I'll try to create a video for you guys. If you guys have suggestions for any other topics or any other questions, please let us know in the comment section as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom